London, late 19th century. The sun, breaking through the dull glass of the attic, plays warm rays on the canvases hanging on the walls. In the small room, filled with the smell of paint and wood, young Charles Henry Sims leans over his work. His hand moves with concentration but ease, creating each stroke as if it were part of a secret ritual. His slightly bent figure is visible. A barely noticeable limp, reminiscent of a childhood injury, is almost imperceptible as he paints. The scene comes to life on the canvas, carefree children laughing and dancing on a green lawn under a clear summer sky. Their movements are full of freedom and lightness, which the artist himself always felt only through his imagination. Charles did not just paint. He was striving for an ideal, for a world where physical limitations disappear, where people are free, joyful, immersed in the harmony of nature. His brush was like a key to this dimension, and each stroke was a step towards escape from everyday life. The painting came to life not only for the viewer, but also for the artist himself, who found a forgotten harmony in these moments. Thank you very much to everyone who watches the video and does not forget to like and comment. I also invite everyone to subscribe to the channel and join our community. In 1873, in a working-class neighborhood of London, Islington, a boy was born into a family of costumers who was destined to change lives through art. Charles Henry Sims was a calm but intelligent child, but at an early age, he suffered a serious injury that could have taken his life. After much treatment, his left leg was saved, but it remained weak. Because of his limp, Charles could not play with other children, jump and run. However, instead of complaining, he turned to his imagination. The long hours spent in bed gave him time to create his own worlds, cheerful, full of light and joy. His imagination went far beyond the narrow confines of the room. When Charles first picked up a pencil, these fantasies took shape. His parents supported their son's interest in art. At first, he studied at the South Kensington College of Art in London, and in 1890, he went to Paris. The Julian Academy, where the best masters taught, became the place where Charles discovered new possibilities of art. He was inspired by the works of the Impressionists, experiments with color and light. Returning to London in 1893, Sims entered the Royal Academy of Arts. But his manners, acquired in Paris, and confidence in his own vision of art, caused conflicts with the teachers. In 1895, he was expelled, called too arrogant. This defeat did not stop Charles. He already knew what he wanted to create. Charles Henry Sims managed to turn his dreams into art that fascinated viewers. The paintings he created at the turn of the 19th and XX centuries breathed joy and light. In 1897, he presented Childhood, a warm, sun-filled scene of children playing in the midst of nature as if in an eternal Eden. This work brought him his first recognition, as it was purchased by the Salon de Paris and is now kept in the Musée d'Orsay. His painting An Island Festival, painted in 1907, received the highest praise. It was a real triumph of beauty and harmony, graceful figures, enthusiastic about dancing, dissolved in the bright glow of nature. Critics called this work his masterpiece. It was as if the artist revived his bright dreams, reflecting the ideal moment of life, filled with freedom and carefree spirit. These paintings brought Charles fame. In 1906, his solo exhibition at the Leicester Galleries became a sensation. That same year, critics called him the Ariel of the Academy, comparing his work to music that inspires and liberates. His studio in Fittleworth resembled a scene from his paintings, a large window let in bright light, among which his own children played. Often they were the models for his work. It seemed that in this space nature, art, and life were combined in a natural harmony, but just when his fame and happiness reached their peak, fate was already preparing a difficult test for him that would change his art forever. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 forever crossed out the serenity of the world created in Charles Sims' paintings. His eldest son, John, who served as a midshipman in the Royal Navy, was killed in November of that year when the HMS Bulwark exploded. For Charles, it was not only the loss of his son, but also the destruction of his ideals. His painting Cleo and the Children, 1915, was the first indication of a change in his art. He depicted the muse of history with red spots on her scroll, symbolizing the blood of war. Charles could no longer paint an ideal world because reality had ruthlessly invaded his life. In 1918, as an official military artist, Sims traveled to France. He depicted ruined landscapes, abandoned villages, and traces of battles that turned the land into a desert. His paintings were now full of pain and devastation. However, Sims's most tragic works appeared at home. Crucifixion-themed paintings, such as Greater Love Hath No Man, 1916, which depicted his dead son on a cross, touched the deepest strings of the human soul. In these works, he explored sacrifice and loss as universal concepts. Charles's art reflected his inner struggle, between pain and hope, between loss and an attempt to understand the meaning of tragedy. These years were a time of great trial for him, which left a mark on his work forever. Charles Sims's fate ironically came together in a whirlwind. In 1920, he was appointed chairman of the Royal Academy of Arts, the very institution that had once expelled him as a student. It was a recognition of his talent, but also a burden. His new position required not only administrative work, but also responsibility for the education of future generations of artists. However, his success did not bring him peace. In 1924, Charles created a portrait of King George V for the Academy, but instead of being honored, the painting caused a wave of criticism. The monarch was rumored to be dissatisfied with the too free execution of the portrait, which combined restraint with excessive dramatic draperies. This work was destroyed after a lengthy debate, which deeply affected the artist. Another of his projects, King John and the Magna Carta, created for the Parliament, also provoked mixed reactions. The sophisticated composition and vivid details were at odds with conservative ideas about historical art. Sims was once again perceived as an artist who challenged the norms. At the same time, the artist's personal life was plunging into chaos. He finally separated from his wife Agnes, and his affair with Vivienne Judwine ended in a breakup. Alienation from family and friends led Charles to a deep loneliness. After leaving office in 1926, he often traveled, looking for new sources of inspiration. But this search led him further and further into the darkness of his own consciousness. The last years of Charles Sims's life were a period of sharp turn in his work. Having abandoned portraits and realistic compositions, he began to work on a series of paintings that were later called spiritual ideas. These were macabre, abstract works full of images of the cosmic struggle, the powerlessness of humanity before unknown forces, and the search for God in a world full of suffering. The figures on his canvases, distorted and suffering, seemed to be swallowed up by powerful forces beyond human understanding. Once full of light, his paintings now resembled whirlwinds of chaos, where colors became aggressive and shapes barely recognizable. Faced with this cycle, critics could not agree. Some considered these works brilliant, comparing them to the works of William Blake or El Greco. Others called them proof of the artist's mania and decline. Sims himself described these paintings as an attempt to understand the cruelty of the world. How do you paint a God of love when the world is full of war and suffering? He wrote. His works became a cry of pain and deep doubt, but at the same time they were full of incredible strength and sincerity. Unfortunately, this artistic breakthrough was accompanied by growing isolation and mental decline. In 1928, a few weeks before the exhibition of his spiritual ideas, Charles Sims ended his life by jumping off a bridge into the River Tweed. His last paintings left the world with the question, were they a prophetic revelation or a testimony of an artist mired in his own abyss? Now, Spiritual Ideas remains a legacy that continues to evoke wonder and reflection, reflecting the tragic and great journey of Charles Henry Sims. It is the morning of April 13, 1928. By the River Tweed, the fog swirls, enveloping the banks in a haze, as if hiding from the world the last act of Charles Henry Sims' life. Leaderfoot Bridge rises above the water, its cold arches silently watching the man standing on the edge. Charles looks down, where the dark surface of the river, still and mirrored, reflects the world as he saw it in his last works, chaotic, filled with power and pain. His thoughts are full of contradictions. It is not only a deep longing for his lost son or the destruction of family happiness. It is the burden of everything he has created and the feeling that it is not enough. The paintings he called Spiritual Ideas were his cry, but was he heard? Heavy stones hang from his coat pockets. Charles closes his eyes and takes a step forward. The water merges with the fog, swallowing him up. It was his last escape to silence, where he believed there would be no pain. After his death, critics debated his legacy for a long time. One of them wrote, "His last works are a cry of the soul that could only be heard by someone who has experienced real loss. It is a beauty born of pain and a tragedy that points to the greatness of the human spirit." Sims's death was not the end of his story. In 1933, the Royal Academy of Arts organized a posthumous exhibition, which brought together more than 80 of his works. 2 rooms of the gallery told the story of 2 periods of his life, the first sunny, idealized scenes of the Edwardian era, the second gloomy but impressive spiritual ideas. The audience, walking between these halls, saw the contrast between the carefree joy and deep longing that defined the artist's life. His works continued to evoke emotions decades later. In the mid-20th century, art historians were looking for answers. Who was Charles Sims? Was he a genius who showed both sides of human existence, or a tragic figure broken by his own losses? We can end the story of Charles Henry Sims by imagining one of his most famous paintings. A bright sunny day, carefree children running in a field, the sky shining with clarity. This was his dream of a world without pain, which he sought to create. And although he could not escape the tragedies of life, his art became a bridge to this dream, which continues to live in the hearts of those who look at his paintings.